and welcome to Tanner's Just Jetz. Hello, Warbirders, and welcome to this World of Warbirds and Tanner's Just Jetz collaboration. For although Tanner flies jet airplanes, she's also a Navy brat with a keen interest in historical aircraft too, especially naval airplanes. So this is mainly her episode, but with some input from me. And as she is still not allowed to use her voice online for security concerns, I will continue to do the narrating. For now, if you like these sorts of collaborations, let us know by comments. We love getting feedback and we read them all. Okay, enough preamble. Let's dive in. Picture this. It is 1943. In the middle of the Battle of the Atlantic, and a convoy of merchant ships push themselves steadily east. There are dark gray skies above, and dark seas and cold waters beneath. And below that, an even darker menace, one of Hitler's gray wolves. A U-boat has been harassing them all night, picking off the defenseless ships one by one, like a deadly sniper. But above them, in the pink of the very early morning skies that hang over the hapless convoy like a gray canopy, hope materializes on the wings of a lone TBF Avenger arriving on the scene, to the great relief of the poor sailors below. They hope that this submarine hunting Avenger will soon live up to its name and get some payback for their fellow mariners who have gone down during the night. The Lone Avenger's crew hunts, without much luck, until the TBF's radar man picks up a blip and advises to the pilot the direction to turn. The chase is on. They fly over the spot indicated on the radar scope and drop flares, and there, the crew of the Avenger finally sees with their own Mark I eyeballs the lurking submarine sitting above the waterline, recharging its battery. They circle around and lower the nose of the aircraft slowly, starting a diving run to drop their bombs upon the Grey Wolf. But instead of diving for safety, this audacious U-boat crew has decided to fight it out on the surface. And the approaching TBF is met with a barrage of very accurate flak fire. The pilot of the TBF Avenger turns to circle in a pattern just outside the fire range of the U-boat's guns. This time, at least, there's no need to rush in half-cocked. They radio for the rest of the Hunter-Killer gang to help out. An F-4F Wildcat arrives on the scene and swoops in, spraying its .50 caliber machine gun at the sub, making the U-boat's death gun crew duck for cover, and suppressing the flak fire. The Avenger simultaneously turns back into the attack dive, dropping 500-pound depth bombs. The U-boat captain decides that it is time now to duck for cover and crash dives, heading for the apparent safety of the deeps, where they are invisible and silent. Well, maybe they are invisible, but they are not truly silent. And the Avenger drops a sonobuoy on the now seemingly empty sea. This was a little floating pod that used an underwater microphone to listen for submarine sounds like the motors or rudders, and relayed that back to the crewmen on the plane, listening intently through a pair of headphones. There it is. The telltale sounds of the U-boat settling in to outweight its opponent, and then attack the convoy again later in the day. Not so fast. Another Avenger arrives to the party, and is guided in by the sonobuoy information relayed to it, and drops a Mark 24 Fido acoustic torpedo that is supposed to zero in on the now unseen, fleeing U-boat. Splash. The torpedo slices into the water and begins its search. All the crew wait as the seconds tick by and the sound man listens intently to his headphones. explosion, the sonobuoy now transmits the sickening, crunching sounds of a submarine being crushed and breaking up deep underwater. An oil slick spreads across the surface of the water. This U-boat will no longer harass this convoy on its way to Europe with materiel for the war effort. Versatile hunter-killer Avengers would have even more tools to fight the U-boats, rockets, and zombie homing torpedoes. To help find these submarines, the flexible Avenger would be fitted with radar, searchlights, and flares for finding the submarines at night. Aircraft fitted with these search tools would soon be known as the Hunter Group, while those with the bombs and torpedoes were called the Killer Group. By the end of the war, the Avengers, with some help from other aircraft types, would have an accredited 35 U-boat victories. Although the TBF Avenger had performed splendidly in the anti-submarine role, and would continue to do so after the war with the U.S. Navy, the Royal Navy, the Royal Canadian Navy, the Royal Netherlands Navy, and the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force, the Avenger had not been designed or built for this anti-submarine warfare job. The key thing about this was how much equipment was obliged to be fitted to the Avenger that would take up room, add weight, and minimize flight capability. In 1944, as the Midway-class carriers were being built, the U.S. Navy started looking for an aircraft that could replace the Avenger, and asked for a single-role anti-submarine platform. Rather than being good in many roles, it would excel only in the role of hunting down and destroying submarines. The original design for this contract came from our good friends at the Grumman Iron Works, and was the XTB-2F, which was only made in the form of a single mock-up. It was a twin-engine torpedo bomber that kind of shares the looks of the B-26, with a large singular tail with shoulder-mounted wings and the engines being mounted up high. It had a large tail resembling that of the A-20 Havoc, but the body was more round like a pill, rather than sharp like a crayon. That, I would say, is my best description of the B-26 nose. Sorry. The XB-2F would be able to carry 3,600 pounds in ordnance and travel a range of 3,700 miles. But this aircraft was deemed to be too large for the carriers, and instead the Navy turned towards another proposal of Grumman's, the XTSF-1. The other was XB-2F, but now we're talking about the XTSF-1. We'll include pictures of all these on the Patreon page, just so you don't get confused. It was an even larger version, if you can believe it, of the F-7F Tiger Cat, with a bomb bay added. Sadly, this aircraft was also deemed too large, and instead the Navy turned towards its third option. Are you ready? This one's the XTB-3F. I hope you guys are having as much fun with this as I am. But trust me, we are getting there. The XTB-3F was originally known as Grumman's Model G70, was selected and given the naval designation XTB-3F-1, being a mixed-power aircraft featuring a Pratt & Whitney double Wasp radial engine in the nose and a Westinghouse J34 in the tail. One turning and one burning. The J34 is the same engine seen on the Sky Knight mentioned in our F9F Panther episode. While building the first test aircraft, it was realized that the new J34 engine wouldn't be able to be supplied at an efficient rate, and the XTB-3F-1 airframe was left with just the twin Wasp in the nose. As a torpedo bomber, the aircraft featured a crew of two sitting in tandem, side by side, and was armed with a 20mm cannon in each wing and an armament load of 4,000 pounds, consisting of many types of bombs, torpedoes, and rockets. On the 19th of December 1945, the XTB-3F-1 would fly for the first time, later being called the Grumman Guardian. having the long banana shape like the Skyraider, though being notably larger. The main differences were the twin vertical stabilizers sticking up from the horizontal stabs, and the razorback cockpit glass. Just 5 days after the first flight, the Navy changed the role of the aircraft from a torpedo bomber to the role of anti-submarine warfare. Due to its role as an attack and torpedo bomber and being smaller, the Navy refocused funding priorities on the Douglas Skyraider program and the Martin Mauler. If not for the threat of the Soviet Union's growing submarine program, that would have been the end of the Guardian. But the United States Navy realized it needed a dedicated anti-submarine platform. But the equipment needed at the time for anti-sub work would not fit inside a single airframe small enough to take off from an aircraft carrier. So a workaround was made when the aircraft were built from the factory in pairs of hunter-killer groups. Let's meet the Hunter, known as the AF-2W, or the Hunter Guardian. It would be easily recognizable by its large, round AN APS-20 radome protruding from under the center of the aircraft. Developed at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, in the late days of World War II as a system to create early versions of what would be one day known as AWACS aircraft, Airborne Early Warning and Control, it would help to warn of incoming Japanese kamikaze attacks. The radar known at MIT as Project Cadillac proved to have many other uses. One of these was for tracking dangerous weather. In 1953, VJ-2, a newly created weather squadron, flew a PB-1W equipped with a Project Cadillac into Hurricane Dolly. The PB-1W was a former B-17 bomber with 300-gallon wing drop tanks, a sealed-up bomb bay, and the internal wing-mounted self-sealing tanks called Tokyo tanks. Although the B-17 with its range was never able to reach mainland Japan for a bombing raid, the name was applied as the tanks extended the range a B-17 could fly by 1,000 miles fully loaded. Holding 3,400 gallons of fuel, the PB-1 could travel for more than 22 hours on full tanks. VJ-2, the weather squadron, would later use the AN APS-20 equipped on the EC-121 Warning Star to track hurricanes and typhoons. Aircraft carrying the AN APS-20 were also found to be extremely well fit for finding and identifying large surfaced vessels like ships and submarines above the waterline. And it was fitted onto many anti-submarine aircraft at the time, including our AF-2W Guardian. The large radar almost caused a pregnant belly look on the aircraft, causing her to be named Guppy. While the Guppy didn't carry any weapons, it featured the radar, and the AN/APR-98 countermeasure receiver was an early onboard warning system, telling the crew when there is a threat and where it is. The Guppy featured a crew of 4. One would pilot, one would work the radio. Another who manned the radar was known as the Eyes, and one would work the countermeasure receiver was known as the Ears. The Eyes and the Ears. A powerful wing searchlight was added to illuminate the submarine for the killer plane. First flying in 1948, the killer plane, known as the AF-2S, had the 20mm cannons removed, but still kept its bomb bay for its new ASW, that's Anti-Submarine Warfare, role. It had a crew of 2, one to pilot and one to work the weapons and radio. It became known as the Scrapper. It could haul up to 4,000 pounds of torpedoes, depth charges, or bombs, while also carrying 6 5-inch HVAR rockets. That's high-velocity aerial rockets. The Grumman Guardian had a service ceiling of 15,000 feet and could reach 253 miles per hour in full throttle, fully loaded. The AF-3 was the only other operationally used variant, also being fitted in the Hunter role. It featured a MAD, that's Magnetic Anomaly Detector, also known by some crew members lovingly as the Donkey Dick. It was a retractable pole from the tail of the aircraft used to detect changes in the magnetic field on Earth, including sonar detection waves from submarines. The radar of the Hunter aircraft would find the area of the submarine and would deploy a sonobuoy field, while the MAD would work off them to find the exact location of the sub in that field of buoys. During the Korean War, the Guardian was used in the maritime patrol role. Being the largest single-engine piston plane of the time, it was a very heavy plane to operate. Especially when it got slow, you needed to operate at low, close-to-stall speeds to land on the carrier. In fact, when fully loaded, the Guardian had a maximum takeoff weight the same as the DC-3. Add to this the fact that the Guardian took off and landed on some of the smaller carriers in the fleet, and it led to lots of aircraft accidents. That led to the plane having a bad reputation, and led to its short service life, and possibly our next plane in this series, if you enjoy it, the Grumman S-2 Tracker. If the Guardian was damaged during the mission, or the crew had to bail out for any reason, a flashing red light and bailout bell could be armed by the pilot for the crew operating in the back of the plane. If there was fear of the plane falling into the hands of the enemy, the pilot would shut the panel over his IFF circuit breaker on the pilot's radio breaker panel, and this would arm a self-destruct for the important gear. When bailing out, the pilot and co-pilot would slide back their canopy, grabbing their parachute seat covers, while the crew in the back would grab their parachutes and jump from a door on the side of the plane, rather than a door on top of the aircraft. The door on top was only used for forced landings or ditching, as jumping out the top, hatch in flight, had a serious risk of your body smacking into the large tail of the Guardian. Ouch! On March 29, 1954, 30-year-old Lieutenant Albert D. McHenry was flying a F-2H Banshee out of Naval Air Station Point Mugo in California when it crashed 70 miles from the coast of San Miguel Island. Upon realizing they'd lost contact with McHenry, the Navy started sending search parties. The next day, in one of these groups, a Guppy Guardian experienced engine trouble. Pilot Lieutenant John W. Miller set the plane down in the water 150 yards south of Santa Cruz Island. The water landing causing a prop strike, and the four-bladed propeller was thrown off the plane. Lieutenant Miller and his crew of Walter G. Brown and Bill Burris waited then 150 yards to arrive on the southern part of Santa Cruz Island and laid out a parachute that they'd grabbed from the plane and sent out distress flares. Soon after, they were spotted and picked up by helicopter that was part of the search and rescue team for the missing Banshee pilot. That same day, a BT-13, also part of the search effort, crashed 15 miles northwest of Santa Barbara, California, in the Los Varras Canyon, killing 2 crew aboard. Today, that Guppy Guardian can be dived upon to be seen by tourists in Santa Cruz. The last active Guardian was retired August 31st, 1955, although it stayed in the reserves until 1957 before most were mothballed at NAF Litchfield Park in Arizona. Many of these Guardians were scrapped except for 5 airframes. These would be purchased and operated by the Aero Union Corporation in California in the role of aerial firefighting. To make the planes look more civilian, they removed the twin horizontal stabilizers on the tail and kept up operations with the aircraft until 1973, when slowly 4 of the 5 airframes were sent off to museums. You can see these survivors at the Pima Air and Space Museum in Tucson, Arizona, where scrappy Guardian serial number 129233 is kept out in the sun, in the colors she wore at Aero Union and keeping the stabs removed. Serial number 123100 is at the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida, while sporting the naval blue scheme she was commonly painted in by the Navy at the time. She keeps a large number 30 on her cowling, the same number she was known by while fighting fires at Aero Union. At the Arizona Commemorative Air Force Museum in Mesa, California, serial number 126731 is done beautifully in tribute to U.S. Naval Vice Admiral and Medal of Honor recipient James Stockdale. While he had participated in the Gulf of Tonkin incident in the Vietnam War, it wasn't until a month later he was shot down in an A4 scooter and was captured by the North Vietnamese and held as a POW at the Hanoi Hilton for 7.5 years. With the wings folded back, in all her glossy blue beauty, she sits with an example of a naval pilot's uniform of the time standing next to the plane. And finally, serial number 123088 is under restoration as we speak at the Chico Air Museum in Chico, California. On September 20th, 1981, she suffered a major crash. Let's keep our hopes up that theirs can turn out as nice as the Arizona Commemorative Air Forces. We hope that you have enjoyed this Tanner's Just Jetz and World of Warbirds collaboration. Again, drop a line in the comments to let us know how we're doing. We love getting feedback and we read them all. As I said before, we'll place pictures on the Patreon page. Why not join? So remember, there's always something more to this sport we call flying. So never stop dreaming and never stop believing. Until next time.